In this video, I'm going to analyse Easyjet by giving my views on the business and whether I personally would buy shares of EasyJet right now. And if you find this video useful, please drop me one of these to support the series. Easyjet is an airline carrier located primarily in Europe. They provide various services from short-haul flights and cargo transportation to various financial services and also building development. EasyJet has a fleet of 342 aircrafts, 14,000 employees and a market capitalisation of £4.1 billion, putting them in the FTSE 250. Much like the last 10 episodes of the stock analysis series, Easyjet seem to be in an oligopoly market structure, meaning that there are a few firms that take up the market share, but individually none of them have marketing influence. Easyjet has found their niche in the competition or the market, and this is where they offer low-cost, short-haul airliners, and their closest competitor I would consider is Ryanair. When looking at the investor sentiment of Easyjet, we can in fact see that by looking at the price-to-earnings ratio, that Easyjet has a negative price-to-earnings. This suggests that they are either unprofitable or there could be worse things like negative shareholder equity. Furthermore, if we compare their market capitalisation to their net assets, or more known as the price-to-book ratio, we can see that it is in line with the industry but ahead of the market. This suggests to me that perhaps prior to the pandemic, airliners were trading at more of a premium and perhaps they were seen as more staple growth stocks. However, at the moment I think that's come down in line, but it does say something as they still have more of an influence over the other stocks in the market, although this could be due to high levels of debt. In the last 5 years, they've managed to grow their earnings on average annual yearly amount of minus 38.2%. Although that really can't be faulted, and it really is understandable since the pandemic had meant that many countries had shut their borders, lots of economies were shut down, and people simply weren't travelling. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense as to why Easyjet is making heavy losses. And in fact, I'd like to point out how resilient this really is. In the last year, their earnings have decreased by over 400%, yet their revenue has decreased by more than half. They had over £6 billion in revenue last year, and now they're only on £3 billion of revenue, yet their earnings are still holding up despite being unprofitable. And the investment here would be if Easyjet are able to reverse this negative earnings trend, reverse their free cash flow, make that once more positive, then this could be a staple investment in a portfolio. Whilst it's unlikely that in the current economic environment that an airliner will be paying a dividend, simply because it's unlikely they'll be getting much business at the moment, I'd like to look at this, or look at the possibility of Easyjet paying a dividend so that we know where it may be in the future, so for more long-term investors, what they may be paying in 5-10 years time. Easyjet had been paying a dividend since 2011, and this had typically ranged between 2 to 6% in yield, although it had considerably got higher the closer to today's date we'd gotten. I'm not going to include the last year in the average yield simply because it spikes up and then gets suspended anyway. And they typically pay once a year, which is in March, and over the last 10 years of their dividend history, whilst the first few years were very strong at high levels of growth, it had started to waver off and therefore had meant that their dividend was inconsistent and often cut. This suggests that this is a very cyclical dividend payer. When the economic outlook is good, businesses are doing well, everyone's spending, then Easyjet are likely to be growing and maintaining their dividend. But in a time of economic uncertainty, more of a doom and gloom outlook, then it's unlikely that dividend will be paid. It may be cut, may be suspended, or it may not be grown upon. And if you sign up to Trading 212, you can get a free share worth up to £100 when you deposit just £1 when you use my link in the description down below to sign up. When looking at Easyjet's balance sheet, we can see that their short-term assets do not cover their short-term liabilities or long-term liabilities. Furthermore, this has a very high debt-to-equity ratio of over 140%. However, it is redeemed by their impressive cash position of £2.3 billion. This suggests to me that whilst yes, they may have the capital available to pay a dividend, it's more likely that they're going to be reinvesting it back into the business and ensuring they are more pandemic proof and able to return to profitability. And so a dividend, whilst would not be a wise idea, I believe it could be announced as early as 2022, although it's probably more beneficial is if they hold the cash, build up their cash reserves, and also reinvest into the business and reverse that earnings trend. However, EasyJet is not without their risks, and the first one is Brexit. Whilst in a month's time, perhaps there may be a more certain outlook to whether we have a deal or not. At the moment, at the time of making this video, it looks more and more likely that we may have no deal, which would mean that EasyJet, since they primarily travel between the UK and Europe, it could mean that they may be struggling a lot more as there are more travel restrictions and obviously cargo restrictions. However, if you are perhaps more bullish on the outcome of Brexit and you believe that a deal may be found, they could be significantly priced down because of this, and therefore investing into EasyJet, despite them being a fairly high valuation, could mean that you could make quite a nice recovery play and also get the exposure to the Brexit deal. Furthermore, we don't know how long this pandemic may last. And whilst yes, there is a vaccine that will be soon readily available, we don't simply know if the pandemic may mutate. We don't know what may happen in the next few years. We may still be in multiple lockdowns over the next few years, or we may move on relatively quickly. Therefore, there is a lot of uncertainty that I suspect the market does not like, and therefore that's probably why EasyJet is significantly priced down from earlier in the year. And so if you believe that there is a chance that this vaccine will be successful and that we will be able to reopen the economy, open up the borders, and therefore have more travel, and you believe that consumer confidence will also increase, then EasyJet could be a good investment. But on the other hand, if you don't think this will happen and you think we may have to be amidst the pandemic for the next few years, travel restrictions might even be tighter, especially when considering Brexit, then EasyJet might be a very bad investment. Although on the other hand, I think EasyJet is in one of the best positions to weather the pandemic should it continue. This is because they do shorter flights, meaning that they can appropriate social distancing. And you may think, wait, how does that add up? Well, they can have more frequent flights, meaning that they could have half capacity on the planes, therefore meaning that because it's not a longer haul flight, that they could at least get some consistent earnings in compared to a 16-hour flight, for example. But furthermore, the longer you are sat next to someone or within a few meter radius, the more likely it is for the virus to spread, and therefore it would be easier to control when you have shorter time periods in which you are sat next to someone. And so with that low-cost alternative, especially when things like the UK may be in the deepest recession for over 300 years, then it makes sense that cheap, low-cost alternatives will be a staple during a recession. And I think that as the pandemic eventually dissipates, it may be slower than we anticipate, that EasyJet are in a much better position than a majority of the airliners that I've seen. This is because they have a very strong financial position and they have a niche in the market that is lesser impacted by the pandemic. And if you'd have held shares of EasyJet in the last 5 years, you would have gotten returns of over -33% with dividends reinvested, which isn't great, but obviously the pandemic has hard hit the business, and that gives you an opportunity. Perhaps buying now means that you could have a lot more money in the future, and therefore I could see this as a speculative, well, a less speculative, more recovery growth play in your portfolio. If you're looking for a little bit of exposure into Brexit, think the deal is likely, then this could be great for that additional returns to be boosted, but it also could add some entertainment value as it is very volatile. However, I could not recommend this for people in retirement unless you are a well-diversified portfolio in which you would not be willing to put more than 1% into EasyJet, at which point it would make sense. But because it's unlikely they will be paying a dividend for the next few years, I think it's justified to see it as a recovery growth play with more risk and therefore may suit those that are younger and investing. Although I personally wouldn't invest in the business, As I don't like the travel sector, but I mainly look for businesses with resilient earnings. And I mean companies that during the pandemic had either managed to increase their earnings or only ever so slightly have them reduced. That may sound like I have less of a risk tolerance, but those are simply the companies I invest in, and these companies will be consistently growing over the longer term, whereas maybe more speculative stocks, I can't guarantee that may happen. However, I would say Easyjet is definitely one of the better placed of the airliners I've seen, but then again, IAG isn't too bad either. And if you're interested in my IAG or British Airways stock analysis, then click the card at the top right of the video. Thank you for watching. I'm Osborne Foreman. Have a great day.